In previous lecture, we discussed the behavior of representative consumer. In this lecture, we will study the behavior of representative firm. Like I mentioned in previous lecture, first we look at representative, meaning so they are identical. This is a simplification. Secondly, for our macroeconomy, so we are taking the micro-founded approach. We start from the bottom and go to the top. And the third, so for the macroeconomy, so we can think about there are two parties or two aspects, two parts. One is household, the consumer. The other is firm. They interact with each other on two different markets. One is a market for goods and service. The other is a market factor. So that's how we approach. Now let's look at firm's behavior. In terms of firm side, there are two things we need to understand. One is their production function, because that's what the firm does. Right? And then so we'll look at firm's objective, which is they are going to maximize profit by demanding labor. Right? Now let's start with how the economy produce. Or in other words, we understand how the production happens. In general, we as economists, we find out there are two key factors of production. We identify there are two. Certainly there's some simplification and there's some abstraction, or we think everything in a very abstract way. On one hand, we need capital. We use K denotes for capital. These include factories, machines. And secondly, we need labor. Okay, so now here we use ND. Remember, when we talk about household behavior, we use NS. S stands for supply. Here, D stands for demand. Remember, so in the factor market, households supply labor or they rent their labor to firm. Firm demand labor or they hire labor. That's what we call demand. Okay. So now, not only these two factors matter to production, quality also matters. But then what is quality? You can think about technology. We use Z to denote the level of technology. Actually, we have a name for this technology. We call the total factor productivity. Okay. So total factor productivity, this is going to be clear later. Actually, it's going to tell us this, it's going to measure for our productivity. The example of total productivity or the example of level of technology as follows. Maybe there's a change in the organizational production. So for example, you have a personal computer, right? But then weather also matters. This is especially important in agriculture or in mining sector. Government regulation is also part of total factor productivity. We need to think about this in a very general term, right? So this is how we organize our economy. And finally, so in modern days, price of energy, this is also important. This also play a role like technology, because energy is kind of considered a key ingredient for production in modern economy. To this end, so we can write this production function in a mathematical form, right? Y is the total output. Okay? K is capital. ND is labor. And F is a function. F is a function. Okay? This function just explains how we convert K and N to some quantity. Okay? And then lastly, so there's a Z. Z is a total factor productivity. It just tells us the quality of our production. If we look at the data, oh, by the way, so the next step is we are trying to find out what is the best production function that can capture. So the next task is going to find out F is F function. So we find F function that capture how we produce. Okay, how we produce. Okay, in order to find the right F, first let's look at the data. This is the US data. from 1960 to 2010. And on the vertical line, what do we have? This labor share of total income. What does this mean? First of all, income. Okay? So income, usually there are two income. One is capital income. The other is labor income. Okay? And why we just differentiate income in these two categories? It's because remember in the factor market, okay, let me just draw the diagram. These households, this is a firm. They interact in the factor market. Okay. So household is going to provide labor and a capital to firms. A firm use capital and the labor they produce to make profit or just make income. Right? But remember, this is a competitive market. So all the income eventually will return to the owner of those resources. Okay, read this part. This is factor market, right? We understand that. Okay. Now, what are we going to do here? What are we going to do here? Okay, what are we going to do here? So, labor and the capital, right? Labor and capital. Okay, because this is okay. By the way, so labor and the capital is going to generate income. Income. This is a competitive market or the market economy. Or the income will return to the owner of capital, to the laborers, to the owner of the labor, or eventually goes to here. Right? But if we keep track of the income that goes to labor and keep track of the income that's to the capital, this also is going to tell us, this is also going to tell us the contribution of each factors on the production. So that's why we look at a labor share of total income. To summarize, okay, so household or whoever owns those things, they provide the factors to firms so that they can produce. And all the income and it's coming from, and it's certainly income is equal to the product. So or what we produce is coming from using labor or use capital. And then the compensation to labor and the capital, which show over here, is going to tell us the contribution of each factor. Now, if you look at it here, you can see, so the labor shares of total income, or in other words, the labor's contribution in producing our total GDP is rather stable. And these numbers are around 0.7. And this is going to give us a basis for the F function. Let's go to the next one. Go to the F function, right? Actually, based on those data and based on more other intensive study for our macroeconomy, and we find out this is probably the best description how U.S. economy producing goods. How we understand that? Y is going to depend on three factors. Z is obvious, is technology or TFP to be precise. K is capital. N is labor. And here, this power, first of all, this power add up equal to 1, 0.36 plus 0.64, add up equal to 1. Actually, this we call the constant return to scale. Okay, this is number one. Number two, this is 0.64 and 0.636. It just tells us we can interpret the contribution of labor on production. Right? This is the contribution of labor. And similarly, 0.36, that's the contribution of capital in production. Right. And finally, so third, based on this production, we can recover this Z, right? So Z, this is mathematical or mechanical equal to Y, which is the total output divided by the product, these two terms, we recover Z, right? What is Z? So Z is something unobservable. OBCR, observable. Right? So what that means? When we look at data, we can measure how much we produce each year. That's the topic we have discussed in previous chapter. We can measure how many capital we use every year, and we can also measure how many laborers are in place, or there are how many hours we work, as I mentioned. Right? But we do not directly observe the quality of our production. Like say, what is the quality of our institution? What is the quality of the computer we use? But we can only implicitly observe these. How? We are going to use this formula. Y divided by the product of these two terms. That's going to give us Z. Okay, this Z. Okay, so it's number 2. So the number here is the contribution. And let me say a few words regarding the constant return to scale. Okay. What this means, they just says if somehow we say, for example, if we double to a double K and we double N, if you plug this into the formula here, you immediately can see, so Y is going to double. Or in general, so if we just multiply K by X, X is a number, whatever number you have, and then multiply N by X, this implies K, Y is going to increase by X. This is what we call a constant return to scale. Or in other words, so in the scale of the economy, it's going to proportional to the resource you have. This is proportional to this, right? So this is production function. This graph just show you Z. Remember Z and review. Z equal to Y divided by K and okay. So this is Z. And Z is measuring the quality of our production. But economists like called Z the solo residual for 2 reasons. Reason 1, this is named after Solow, Robert Solow. He won Nobel Prize for his contribution in understanding economic growth. This is number 1 reason. Number 2, this is called residual. This is something we don't know because we only observe those things. We only observe those things. And whatever is left, unmeasurable, we put this residual. And certainly, we also call this is a measure of the ignorance of our understanding of the macroeconomy. In general, so this Z increase over time. By the way, so this is a very large number. The number itself, there's no unit, right? So if you like this, the unit, what's the unit? So, but anyway, so usually we just care about the trend, the growth trend, or the percentage change from 1 year to the other. Overall, this is increasing. Now we can look at our production function in a little bit detail. In 2004, in the US economy, so we know this is a total number of workers. And then by looking at the K and by looking at the Y, we can back our Z. By the way, Z just here, right? So we have Z. Okay. And we can say, so Z is going to 20.68. So some students are curious. So this 20.68, isn't that this number is between 5 and 11? Right? But again, so let's say, so this is the unit is a little bit arbitrary, right? So what we care is the change or the difference between 1 year to the other year, and you feel free to pick whatever unit you have. Okay, so we end up with this like Z equal to 20.68. But as long as you use the consistent unit across over a year, you'll find. Okay. Now, given those information, we have the production function. So Y is going to equal to, so this z we plug in, n equal plug in, right? And then, so we are going to have y as a function of the k, as function of k. To be precise, here we are going to look at a production function for a given value of z and n. Or in other words, so the original function, this one, is 4-dimension. 4-dimension. Why is 4-dimension? We are going to map in z, k, and this 3-dimension. Mapping the 3 dimensions into 1-dimension y. Okay, it is almost impossible for us to visualize. And then, so we are going to reduce the dimension by fixing z and n, and then we are going to only look at the relationship between k and y. Okay, so that's going to give us a meaningful illustration. So this is how the production function look like. On the horizontal line, you have k. Vertical line, you have total GDP. This curve is exactly of this curve, right? So now let's see. So what is something particular about this curve? This curve usually we call the concave. Okay, and what concave means mathematically, the slope is declining. Okay, the slope declining. So here, so this is the best way to illustrate. If you increase capital by 1,000 units, okay, by 1,000 units, you can see the change in output is decreasing. Okay, but that's equivalent to say, so the curve becomes flatter. But what does this mean and why this happened? This means so here, so first of all, the slope has become flatter. This means we call the marginal productivity of capital is declining. Okay, but the detailed explanation for MPK is coming. But for now, let's just summarize what the property we have for the production function. Remember here, again, let me emphasize, we just take a z and n, d, these are given. We only focus on the relationship between k and y. Now we observe first slope is declining. The curve is getting flatter and flatter. This is linked to MPK. It's coming in the following slide. On the other hand, output is increasing capital. The more capital you have, more you produce. It's very intuitive. Now let's see, so what do we mean decrease in marginal productive capital? Okay, first of all, marginal product of capital. Usually I would like short it for MPK, marginal product of capital. It's the additional capital that can be produced with one additional unit of capital. Or in other words, so this is roughly equal to change in y divided by change in k. Additional unit of capital brings how much additional output. But this immediately is equal to the slope of the production function, right? Okay. So regarding to MPK, there are further two properties. One I already mentioned, so MPK is declining, but the other one is obvious. MPK is positive, meaning so the slope is positive. Let's go back. Okay, so first you can see the curve is increasing. But second is the slope, if you just put tangent line, slope. Actually, so there's another slope. Okay. So slope is decreasing. Slope is positive. Slope is positive means so more capital is always beneficial to production. But slope is declining, meaning so the more capital you have, the less addition you're going to get, or less contribution you're going to observe. So let's go back here. MPK is declined as the capital stock is increased. This is what we call the diminution marginal productivity of capital. What is the economic explanation behind the decline in MPK? Just imagine you have one cell phone compared to you don't have cell phone. And clearly, so this first cell phone you have, this increase your productivity dramatically. Now imagine you have the second one. What is going to be the benefit of having a second one? Or what is the marginal product you're going to have from the second one? I would imagine very small. So that's one explanation, right? So now let's look at this example again. Yeah, so, oh, sorry. To summarize, here we just look at the production function through the lens of K and the Y. And we just take Z and N, these are as given. Now we have seen so how Y is going to change with K, and we have derived a few properties. The most important one is that the marginal product of capital is declining. The more physical capital you have, the less contribution of the additional unit of capital is going to bring. I just give an explanation. Okay? This is going to be very important for us to understand many significant issues in macroeconomics. So, for example, the long run economic growth. Okay? Now we are going to look at the other side of the same production function. Instead of fix N, we are going to fix K. So these two are given. Now we are going to look at how N is going to affect Y. Remember, so originally, so this is like 3 dimension as input and Y, 1 dimensional output. Because it's too complex, because it's like a total 4-dimensional problem. Okay, so instead we are going to look at a particular dimension, or in mathematics we call this like a projection. Now just imagine if we fix Z and fix K, and then we plug in the number, and then we are going to have the production function look as follows. Apparently this is a typo. Let me erase here and highlight where the typo is. The typo is here. This should be 0.7 instead of 0.3. Okay, so this. Now this is how the output is going to change with labor. Okay. And similarly, so we can put them on a diagram. On the horizontal line, this is labor. On the vertical line is output. And then we have a similar graph as we saw when we studied K and Y. And clearly, so we can see this is an increasing curve, meaning the more N you have, the more you can produce. It's very obvious, right? So if you have more workers work for the economy, work in the economy, the more you can produce. The second, the slope of the curve is declining. It's declining, right? And this essentially is just like we had before. It's decreasing marginal product, but now it's the marginal product of labor into marginal product of capital. Now we go to the next slide. Okay. Definition. The marginal product of labor, here usually we call it MPL, right, is the additional output that can be produced with one additional unit of labor, or more precise, this equal to delta Y divided by delta N. Regarding to marginal product of labor, first is positive. It's obvious. The more worker you have, the more you can produce. Secondly, MPL is declining. So, but this typo. So declining as labor is increased, and this is called diminution marginal product of labor. Okay. And then why is that? One way to interpret it It's because the more worker you have, and then the workplace becomes crowded. You have more worker to share the fixed amount of resources, and hence the additional worker is going to bring you less product. That's behind the diminution margin of labor. Now, we understand how the production is going to vary with labor and vary with capital separately. In this slide, we are going to look at firm's problem. Firm's objective is revenge of profit. Right? In order to produce profit, firm is going to rent capital, and they're also going to rent labor. The capital costs them R, the labor is going to cost them W. Okay. Those we can consider or interpret as prices. What's price of what? Price of factors. Okay. Where the price coming from? Here, price are taken as given. And then later we are going to explain. So where do those prices come from? Or what determines the price? For now, prices are given. It's given as a signal. Okay, it's given a signal to the business owner. Right? As a matter of fact, so the wage is going to determine in the labor market. And similarly, the interest rate here, actually the interest rate or the price for capital is going to determine in the capital market, supply and demand. Right. Now let's look at what determines the profit. The profit equal to output minus cost. Okay, and then what's the output? This is what they produce, and this is the cost. The cost has two terms, right? One, you have cost of capital. Secondly, you have cost of labor. So now we are going to put a further assumption or simplify. K is fixed because in the one period there's no change of capital. We are going to focus on how profit is going to change with labor, or eventually we're going to see what determines labor supply, what determines wage. Okay. Let's look at an example. So there's a small business called Clip Joints. So their business is to groom dogs. The capital they need include clippers, tubes, and brushes. What labor they need? They need workers who's able to groom dogs. At the end, what's the output? The output is the number of dogs they groom. For each dog they groom, they get some profit. They get some revenue. But this, and this table just show their production, or show how they're going to make money, or what's their business model. And also from this table, we can see how they're going to make the decision in terms of workers. How many workers they're going to have. First column is the number of workers. Second column is the number of the dogs they can grow. And the third column, so we just take the difference between two rows, give the marginal productivity of labor. If no worker hired, no dogs grown. First worker is grown 11. Second worker and 2 workers is going to grow 20. Okay, and so on and so forth. Now, this 11 coming from the difference between 0 and 11, or between 0 worker and 1 worker, or in other words, this 11 is the first worker can bring. Now the 9 is the difference between these two. Right? 20 minus 11 give you 9. This 9 is the second worker can bring. This is the first worker, number 1 worker. This is the number 2 worker. This is the number 3 worker. And clearly this is declining. Why is declining? You can imagine. So they have same amount of tubes, same amount of brushes. And the more worker is going to share the fixed amount of capital, meaning so each additional worker is going to have less capital. So that's why their margin productivity of labor is going to decline. Now let's see what the revenue or what is the marginal productivity of labor in dollar term. Just imagine if each dog they groom, they are going to charge $30. Now the first worker is going to bring marginal productivity in terms of dollar of 330. Because this is essentially this is the difference between these two. But what this number coming from? It's coming from 11 times 30, $30. And similar, the second one brings you this amount, third one brings you this amount, so on and so forth. Right? Now we go to the critical part. Okay, where P is the price for each dog groom they're going to charge. Now we go to the critical part. The firm need to decide how many workers to hire. Okay, this is a critical part. So for example, if the nominal wage equal to 240, but remember again, so we just take the price as given or the wage as given. Okay, in the future, we are going to have analysis that's going to tell us what determines wage. But for now, we just take wage as given and see how the firm is going to respond to a particular wage they observe. Okay. So if wage equal to 240, the demand they are going to have, you have two ways to understand. Okay. Let's first go to this one. If wage equal to 240, for the firm, they are going to think in the margin, and they think in terms of a cost and a benefit of bring additional worker. What is the cost? Is going to 240 for additional worker. What is the benefit? It's the marginal productivity of the labor in terms of a dollar. First one, certainly is a good hire because it's greater than 240. Second one, yes, I can still hire 240. Will I hire the third one? No, because if I hire the third one, I start to lose money. Hence, the optimal choice is 2. This is one way. Now, alternatively, you can think about wage in terms of a number of the dog they can groom, or we think about real wage. This is not in dollar term. This is in terms of numbers of a product. Worker you need to pay 240. 240 in terms of price of 30, meaning 8 dogs to groom. Now we go to the previous one. Okay, maybe so let's look here. Again, in the margin, in terms of how many numbers of workers to hire, there are not more workers to hire. The firms need to compare cost. Need to compare cost versus benefit. What is the cost in terms of dog they're gonna grow? The cost is 8. Now the first one is going to bring 11, is a good higher because it's greater than 8. The second one is also good because it's greater than 8. The third one, no, because it's going to cost them 8, but they can only groom 7 dogs. So again, we get the same number of 2. So that's the optimal they are going to hire. Okay? So in other words, here, ND equal to 2. Right? So now let's see. So what happened if the nominal wage decrease and it decreased to 180? Okay? And then we can do the same exercise, and it shouldn't be too challenging for you. I will leave that for you. You will find out the optimal demand is going to be 3. Clearly, the cost is going to decrease. It's wage decrease. And then from this exercise, you can see, so the decrease in wage both in real term and nominal term. Oh, by the way, in nominal term, it just means in dollar. In real term actually means in terms of numbers of dogs the worker can groom. Okay, if the wage decreases, and then the demand for workers is going to increase. Hence, we are going to have this diagram. So how we understand this diagram? On the horizontal line, you have a number of workers. Vertical line, you have revenue. That is actually, so the revenue is given by this blue curve. This is the production, right? But certainly, so you can just multiply this by P, give you a nominal term. But now here, so we have real term. Sorry, we have the yes, we have real term, right? So this is in terms of the real goods you produce. Now we also plot this. We also plot this WND, right? And then, so what is WND? This is the cost. And remember, the profit equal to this minus this, right? But by the way, these are just in real term. But let me just go back to previous one. Okay. Oh. So look at here, profit equal to revenue minus wage cost. Here, this is fixed, which is ignore that. Okay, now let's go back here. And then at the end, what the firm cares is about, let me write down, cares about D, if, and D, there's a key, minus W times ND. Meaning they cares about the difference between these two. Difference between these two. Right? And then so clearly you can see, so the difference is going to be maximized when you choose this n, you maximize such that, so the slope of this curve equal to the slope of this cost line. Or in other words, when MPN equal to W. So MPN is the slope of this curve, and the W is the slope of this cost line. Right? Or in other words, when firm maximize profit, they're going to demand their workers such that this is true. Now remember, so on the right hand side is the cost, on the left hand side it's the benefit. Okay? Now let's see what happened. So you have two choices. If you reduce labor demand or you increase labor demand, I'm going to show you both are bad idea. So again, so it's cost, benefit. Cost, benefit. Okay, so if you reduce this a little bit, remember, so you have a decrease in margin of active labor, meaning here, so you're going to have higher MPL, but the W is fixed. Hence, when you reduce, your benefit is going to exceed your cost. Meaning, so when you reduce, you're going to lose profit. Because in the margin, the worker is going to bring you profit. So, but then you'll fire them, you lose profit. On the other hand, if you increase, you hire additional worker W, but the MPK is lower because of decrease in margin per active labor. Hence, your margin worker is going to bring your loss. Right? So in either case, it's not a good idea to adjust. Either you reduce, meaning you fire the margin worker, or you increase you hire additional worker. In either case, you're going to lose profit. Only when these two equal to each other, or when you demand a worker such that these two equal to each other, you're going to maximize your profit. And this is the marginal productive labor. It's decreasing with n. If you have a real wage, or okay, so if you have a real wage change, and then so you can see, so the demand is good. So if this increase, and then the demand is going to decrease. The demand decrease immediately means marginal activities of labor is going to increase because you have less worker, right? And then later, so when we have a labor supply curve, these two together, we are going to see the determination of wage rate in equilibrium and the labor supply and demand in equilibrium, right? Now let's see so how change in capital can affect the marginal product of labor. Okay. On the horizontal line, we have labor input. On the vertical line, you have marginal product of labor. Okay, they are decreasing, right? So this is a declining marginal product of labor. If you have more capital, and clearly, so this is going to increase, which means fixed amount of labor, the marginal productivity is going to increase. Why? For each worker, for the given worker, each of them have more capital. They become more productive. So that's why it is increased. Similarly, we can look at how the change in total factor productivity is going to affect marginal productivity of labor. First, let's look at how that affects the output. If you have a higher Z, Z2 is greater than Z1, this can happens when when the economy widely adopt computer, or 100 years ago, so the economy has widely adopted electricity. So that's going to increase how we this is going to change how we produce and increase our total output. The entire curve shift up. The entire curve shift up, you can see at any point of n, you can see the slope is going to increase. But this immediately means if there's an increase in TFP, the curve is going to shift to the right. Meaning, so given n, you can see, so the marginal productivity of labor is going to increase. This after Z2 is introduced. Z2 is greater than Z1, right? Let's go back. Which essentially means, so given the labor, so the marginal product of labor is going to increase. Curve is going to steeper. It's very intuitive because for each labor, they have better way to produce. They're more efficient. They can produce more. The curve shift right or increase. Right. To understand the impact of changing labor and the impact of changing technology, how would that affect the market productive labor? We can look at a particular case study. In history, in Europe, so in the 14th century, and more specifically, so during 1348 and 1350, Black Death peaked in Europe. In the worst day, it killed more than half of their population. This is just provide us with a very unique historical moment to understand how the marginal productivity of capital and how the marginal productivity of labor is going to change as a response to some exogenous change in labor. And furthermore, this is kind of a testing ground. It's a testing ground for the theory we just had. Now let me explain to you how we're going to test our theory. In this particular historical moment, L force sharply. It happens so quick, the capital, it's safe to say the capital stayed the same. Why? Just imagine, so there are many like farms or many shops, right? They produce different things. Just in 2 years' time, they lost their worker, but the capital doesn't change, right? So they're not going to destroy the capital. It means the Black Death itself won't cause a destruction of capital. If it is a war, yes, it could be the case. It's going to destroy the capital. But the Black Death, a disease or virus, is not going to kill, is not going to destroy the capital. So it is safe to assume K fixate. Now follow what we just had before. Maybe we can just look at here. Look at this slide. Okay. In 2 years' time, labor suddenly decline. So if you go, we were here, and suddenly cut a halt, we go to here. And then remember, the capital doesn't change, meaning we're going to stay in the same demand curve or same margin product of labor curve. And that means we are going to move from this start to this start. And the immediate means marginal productivity of labor increase. All right. So let's go back to here. The marginal productivity of labor increase. At the same time. So the margin, what happened to the marginal productivity of capital? It's safe to say that each machine becomes less productive because you're going to lose those skilled worker, right? So MPK is going to fall. But in any case, we are going to focus on the MPL. The MPL falls sharply as a response to Black Death, killed more than 50% of the Europe population. Now, how we are going to test this fall, or what data we're going to see? First, let me show you the data, and then explain to you what this means. Here, this is a paper by Carr published in Journal of Political Economy. And in this diagram, these authors show two series of wage data. And this wage data, they just normalize this time period, actually here, as 100. And then so just keep trace of the wage rate throughout European history. Remember, so Black Death happens around that time, right afterwards, right? There's a shortage of labor, and the wage rate increased significantly. But remember, let's go back to previous slides. This is what we discussed earlier, right? So in equilibrium, wage equal to marginal productive labor. Now, if N declines sharply, MPL or MPN, so sometimes I use this MPL or MPN, but the same thing. This is going to increase. And then in equilibrium, this means wage must reflect this change is going to increase. But that's exactly what the data show us. Okay, let's go back to the last one. Okay, this is exactly what show up. This is exactly what show up in history. Okay, so N decline, MPN increase, and that means wage must increase. Okay. Now let's look at other case study. You look at more recently, 2008 and 2000 recession. This was called Great Recession. It was triggered by the collapsing housing market. Okay, sometimes we also call it financial crisis. Okay. To understand what's going on there, so usually, we may have problem to measure in total TFP. And why? Why? Because we must measure in capital. We must measure in capital stock, but usually we can only measure in capital stock precisely with a lag. Or in other words, we need to wait sometimes to have precise measure of capital sum. Hence, we don't have a timely measure of TFP. Remember, TFP Z equal to Y divided by K. This is a number here, and there's another number here. But if you are not able to measure K promptly, then you cannot measure Z in a timely manner. However, we can get a timely measure of average labor productivity. So essentially, we are going to measure how many goods or service does each worker produce. So this is something you can predict because you observe Y, right? And then in a very crude way, so the labor productivity is equal to Y divided by N. You observe Y, you observe N. Okay. In 2008 and 2009 recession, the average labor productivity declined, but it declined much less compared with a typical recession. Maybe this show up. Let's see. So maybe show up here. So this is a percentage change from trend of the average labor productivity. Same example. So if you look at a 74, 75 recession, look at 81 recession, look at a 19 recession, look at 2001 recession, right? So you can see this one roughly is smaller compared to this one, right? So this is something economists trying to understand. Okay? So this recession, oh, by the way, so if we knew the magnitude of this recession, or maybe you can see here, hopefully, unfortunately, no, okay. But just tell you, so what happens? So in terms of total GDP, in terms of unemployment rate, or in terms of the scale of the recession, this one is the worst since Great Depression. Okay. However, if we look at average productivity, it seems like it wasn't too bad. Right? First, it is better than these two, and secondly, it's the same scale like this. But in terms of other measures, say in terms of unemployment, at some point it reached 10%. In terms of total GDP, it declined more than 3%. It's pretty bad. But why, in terms of labor productivity, wasn't too bad? Economists, they scratch ahead, they find out two possible reasons. Reason number one, the cause of the recession is different. It's largely because of housing sector problem and the problems in financial system. Hence, it has very little to do with the workers' productivity. The workers' productivity has very little to do that. This is different from, say, for example, if we look at 1974, it has big impact on labor productivity because this is an oil shock. Oil price skyrocketed. That's going to reduce the productivity. Okay? And similarly in 2001, so this is internet boom bust. So that's going to reduce productivity. Okay? But in the 2008, 2009 recession, it's largely caused by housing market collapse. This has very little impact on how the worker can produce. And secondly, it could be the case there's a long-term shift in employment across sectors. Meaning during that time, so the worker may shift from construction and manufacturing to service sector. That's kind of compensate the shock. Because usually to service sector, so how the workers are more productive. So yeah, they are losing jobs in the construction manufacturing, but now they shift to this sector, and it's going to offset each other. Hence, if you look at the workers' labor productivity, it won't drop too much. Right. Now we have a practice question. Okay, so we have a practice question. So this question asks you, so essentially this question asks you, so what would happen? What would happen if the government, in this case, so the President Bush decide to cut the tax rate? If the tax cut, how would that affect the workers' decision? Right. So I'm going to use a diagram to explain how this is going to affect workers' decision. The key here is this. It is, right? So now you have wage and then multiply this is labor supply. Right? So this is actually labor supply. But now why there's 1 minus T? Because T is a tax rate. Okay, and then so these things multiply this is after tax wage rate. Right. This question asks you first, what is the budget constraint of worker? And second, they describe the impact of this tax cut on consumption and labor supply. Maybe I'm going to use this part to draw a diagram. Okay. So this L, this is C. Okay, so originally you have your budget constraint. Right. Now let's go back to the previous one. So 1 minus T times W. That is the real wage the consumer cares. If T decrease, and this parenthesis is going to increase, and then the entire thing is going to increase. Meaning, so the real wage or the net wage is going to increase. That immediate means the curve is going to become steeper. Right, and then so you're going to see it's going to something like this. But there are two effects. Effect number one is a substitution effect. Number two is the income effect. What is the substitution effect? The wage change from W 1 minus tau, maybe you can call like a tau. Yes, you can use tau. Go to W times 1 minus tau. Let's call it tau hat. And we have tau hat is less than tau, meaning the entire thing here, if you call like a W2, and here W1, you have a W2 is greater than W1. And hence you have a substitution effect, right? Essentially, leisure becomes more expensive. Right? Now, on the other hand, there's the income effect. What's the income effect? If you keep the same amount of leisure, or if you work the same hours, because W2 is higher, hence leads your income is going to increase. Your income is going to increase leads to your leisure is going to increase. This is what we call the income effect. Now, how we are going to understand the net effect? Actually, I have a graph here, but this is slightly different. It's slightly different, right? Let's just look at it here. What do we have? This is for another question. So maybe just let me just use. Okay, let me just stick this one. Stick this one. Let me just redraw this. Okay, so you start with this one. Now we go to this one. Okay, so you have interval curve is I1. Now what we need to do is first draw a line. Okay, so it goes to parallel to the last one. This is not perfect, just here. You move from this dot to this dot. It's called substitution effect, right? Why? It's because wage 2 equal to 1 minus tau hat times W is greater than wage 1 equal to 1 minus tau W, right? Because the tau decrease. And then leisure becomes more expensive. We substitute consumption for leisure. So then your leisure decrease. Now, the wage increase, there's income effect. Now we go to here, right? So hence you go to here, go to this dot. Right, let's go O1, O2, O3. Okay, so O1 to O2 is a substitution effect. O2 to O3 is a income effect. Right? And this is how we use a graph to answer here. How to understand impact of the Bush tax code of a consumption labor supply. Right? Now we look at another practice question. So here, just considering the same model as we discussed in previous lecture. Suppose consumer dividend income increase and the wage falls at the same time. How would that affect? How would that affect? Okay. Now this graph just tell you, so what would happen? Okay. So we start with, let's see. We start with, let me see. So dividend income increase and the wage falls. And then so here we are going to start with, let me see. O1 to O2, right? We started with ABC. We started with A, B, C. All right, so A, B, C, that is the original. So let me write down. So original, this is original budget constraint. Now you have new budget constraint A, B, A1, B1, C. Okay, A1, B1, C. What's the difference? So first, A1, B1, C is flatter, means the wage rate is fall. But at the same time, so if we fix this amount of leisure, actually this is leisure, this is C, consumption. And you can see your consumption is going to higher, compare B to B1 is higher. That's coming from dividend income because you have extra income, right? Now let's see how this is going to affect the consumption and the leisure. At the original budget constraint, so you have this indifferent curve, and this is original optimal choice. And all three, this is the final one, this is the new one. But to understand what happens, so we draw this third line. This third line parallel with the last one, meaning so the third line, what is particular about third line? There are two things. Number one, the same wage as the new budget constraint. Is one. Two is going to tangent with I1. That just keeps the original income. So now you can see the lower wage is going to push the household to more leisure. So O1 to A2. Okay, this is the first step. This is like substituting effect because leisure is cheaper, so they just use more leisure. Now finally we are going to move from O2 to O3. And what's the change cost O2 to O3? This is the income effect. And why there's a change from O2 to O3? Okay. This is actually here, this is because there's a fall in income, right? Because the wage rate falls, right? So now you can see both C and the leisure falls. Both C and leisure falls, right? So hence, so you can see, so O1 to O2 is a substitution effect, and O2 to O3 is income effect. Okay. Now here, so we draw slightly different, but still, so O1 to O2 is a substitution effect, and O2 to O3 is a income effect. But this just depending on, so the difference between this one and this one is depending on, because let me write in the next one. This is because in terms of income, there are two sources of income change. One is your dividend. The other is your wage income. Okay. In this one, so we just considering the case. We are considering case the net impact. Remember, so your dividend income is increased, but your wage income can potentially decrease because wage rate lower. And here, which is considering the case, the net income is increased. But here, we're just considering the net income is decreased. Hence, the O2 to O3, O2 to O3 is a negative income effect. And this one, let's go to the next one. Here, the O2 to the O3 income effect is positive. Right. To summarize, in this lecture, and actually compared with the previous lecture, we studied two things. One is the consumer's behavior. The other is firm's behavior. Consumer, so they are going to decide between C and L. And for firm, so here we focus on, we shall take Z and the K as given. We focus on how firm is going to make their labor demand decision. And the firm decision is going to summarize by one equation, MPN equal to wage. And in the future, we are going to combine consumer and the firm together. We are going to see what determines wage. But as a preview, it's very simple. For households, is going to supply labor. Firm is going to demand labor. For households, wage play a role, as these two exercises shows, right? Wage change is going to change the labor supply. For firm, we already knew, so the labor demand is such that it's given by here, or it's determined by wage as well. And then so in the equilibrium, these two must equal to each other. Supply must be equal to demand, and that immediately will give us the wage. Right. So we will go to the discussion in details in the future lecture. For now, make sure we understand how consumer make their consumption leisure choice, taking W as given. How firms make their labor supply decision, take wage as given. Right. We leave the discussion for future.